Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode, another session of Ask Professor Paranormal. That's me. I see some familiar folks here. That's really good. So, if anybody's new, just to let you know, if you don't know who I am, I do suggest you check out my website, which is just lloydauerbach.com. But I am a parapsychologist with now coming up on 45, actually, it is 45 years of experience in the field, just about. A little bit more than that. And I do quite a bit. KW, hello. Hi, Susanna. Hi, everybody. Paul, Lucas, Rab6969. Hello. Oh, it's Marie. Hi, Marie. Good to see you here. Friend of mine in Hawaii. Okay. Well, anyway, this session, for those of you who don't know, it's really to kind of come and bring up topics, ask me questions that you might have, or just some things I can point you to in the paranormal and parapsychology and all of that. We can also talk about pop culture, especially as related to psychic and paranormal stuff. Happy to do that, and that can run from movies to TV to comic books. And if you really want to know, I can talk about chocolate too. Lucas, oh yeah, get a LexisNexis person besides me here. That'd be really cool. I'm trying to get some of my coworkers to come, but they generally have families and are busy with other things as well. Be nice to actually have some other LexisNexis nerds along here as well. For those of you who don't know, LexisNexis is an online information provider, and I've been working for them for a really long time. That's my day job. So occasionally I do ghost stories things for law firm librarians too. That's they've kind of not only accepted my work in parapsychology, but otherwise. Randy, good to see you. Isn't New Jersey just a lurker's background, Randy? Isn't that what that is in many respects? Okay. So as usual, I'm just going to start out talking about, hi Tina, the Rhine Research Center, which is in its 90th year. Kind of not a continuous organization as Rhine, but it started in 1935 as the Duke Parapsychology Lab, Duke University. Switched out to a foundation in 1965 when J.B. Rhine retired from Duke University. Hi, Karen. And then eventually, and within the organization they had at that time, the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man was the Institute for Parapsychology. And then in the late 80s, this became the Rhine Research Center, which is where we are today. There are events going on at the Rhine if you happen to be in North Carolina, but also there are some really good videos. If you go to YouTube and type in Rhine Research Center, you'll see that there is a Rhine Research Center channel, and there is a playlist which is the Rhine at 90. And the Rhine at 90 is doing monthly lectures. The first one was actually myself and the executive director, John Kruth, talking about our experiences with the Rhine over the years, how important that lab, the Duke Parapsychology Lab, was to us both, but also talking about what's going on now since I am president of the board of directors and John is the executive director and research director. The following month, and I really encourage you to go watch this video, Joe McMoneagle, the #1 viewer for the U.S. government, the Army project, the Stargate program, talks about remote viewing. And not only, a little bit about the history, but mainly about how to do it and, what you need to do and all of that. And I think people who have been looking or reading stuff on remote viewing, if you have not been reading Joe's stuff, you may be surprised at how simple it is to sit down and do remote viewing. It's both simple and not. And I'm going to kind of get to this question, Lucas, in a moment, but I just wanted to say that one of the things I learned from Joe, and actually from other folks many years ago, this is the truth about being more psychic, whether you're doing remote viewing or something else. Getting out of your own way. As some people would say, get out of your head. In that, we as human beings have a habit of, something pops in our head, we try to fit it to what we know. We try to, if it's incomplete, we try to finish the sentence. Kind of like AI does. We're predicting the next words in the sentence. And we categorize, we name things. And if you get some visual stuff with remote viewing, it's going to automatically be categorized. You're going to either write it off or you're going to try to make some sense out of it. And you may be, let's just put it this way, it's almost like getting pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. But as soon as you start filling it in with your thoughts and memories as opposed to letting it lie, you're going to get the wrong thing. So this, one of the things that he talks about is that specific piece is actually what to do with remote viewing. And it's not a very logical process. It's actually not that hard at all. It's not that tough to do. So I really encourage you to watch that. Then Christine Simmons Moore did the lecture actually last week. So this month's lecture. She is the head of the psychology department at the University of West Georgia, undergrad. She's also a parapsychologist. She has her degree in psychology with an emphasis on parapsychology. She's actually one of the co-founders of the Rhine Education Center where I teach. And she did a great lecture on synesthesia, kind of one way that people perceive the world and kind of hold the perception of the world. So I believe this coming month in June, we're going to have Stephen Schwartz talking about something. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to talk about, consciousness or his work in using remote viewing with archaeology, but he's had a pretty long history with our field as well. Okay, Lucas, what's the extent of your performance magic mentalism training? How has it helped in your paranormal investigations? Good question. So first of all, I have to say I loved magic growing up. I had a magic set, didn't do well at performing, so I never really got into it very deeply. But I was very interested in watching magicians, went to see, especially was fascinated by the work of Doug Hanning in the 1970s into the 80s. He had a Broadway show called The Magic Show, which was amazing. He was a really lively performer, and I don't think Copperfield would have been David Copperfield without Doug Hanning setting the stage more or less for him. So I was very interested in that stuff. I got to meet the amazing Kreskin when I was a high schooler. Went to see one of his shows and got to meet him and talk to him a little bit as well. So I was really interested in mentalism. So in the graduate training in parapsychology for us at John F. Kennedy University, doesn't exist anymore, there was a course called Creation of Illusions, which was put together by the head of our department, John Palmer, with the help of a local magician, a guy named Vic Iveshin. He was a magician. He knew a lot of mentalism too. And Vic taught the course. We had a really good textbook called 13 Steps to Mentalism. The whole purpose of the course was to teach us about the range of things that mentalists and magicians could do that could be perceived or used for psychic fraud, or even just people making mistakes. So during that time, I got really fascinated by what was going on there, but I will kind of back up a moment because I was bartending my way through grad school. And actually my first year in grad school, I was teaching bartending and running the professional bartender school in San Francisco because I worked for the company in New York. And we had a guy come in who is a former student who started making balloon animals for people. So I made sure he taught me how to do balloon animals, which I can still do. When I started bartending, that made me some money, but the place to buy the proper balloons was the local magic shop. And with Vic's course, Vic Iveshin's course, Creation of Illusions, going to the magic shop, and the woman who ran the magic shop at the time, Polly Bertzel, had done her master's thesis based on a survey of Bay Area magicians and their beliefs in psychic phenomena. So this was all kind of coming together for me. And I started performing. I bought some stuff. I started performing a little bit, joined the local Society of American Magicians, got to know a guy named Bob Steiner, who was founder of the Bay Area Skeptics, but a good guy generally. And I'll let you know that from the time I moved back to New York, actually even right before I moved to New York in '81, and when I started going back to New York and joined another chapter of the Society of American Magicians, I started performing. The group in New York was a really great group. We performed in a bunch of places. I started doing comedy magic, but at the same time, I was continuing to learn and read as much as I could about mentalism. There's a local mentalist in New York that I worked with quite a bit. In fact, I had kind of a ghostly experience at his apartment with another magician as well. Not a fraud. It was actually very real. And I started getting into mentalism a little bit. I started putting a little bit of that into my comedy act. I performed in comedy clubs in the 1980s in the New York area. And when I moved back here to California in the mid 80s, I performed at comedy clubs and other places here in the Bay Area. Cut to the end of the 80s, and one of my mentors was a sociologist named Marcello Truzzi. Skeptic, true skeptic, like middle of the road, but very helpful to people in parapsychology, not an enemy at all. And Marcello, I talked to him frequently over the phone because where I was working at LexisNexis in San Francisco had an 800 number, so he called me all the time. And Marcello was a member of the Psychic Entertainers Association and a mentalist himself, and he convinced me that I really should move away from comedy magic and move into mentalism alone. Now, he tried to convince me to be a serious performer. In other words, my act being very serious, I couldn't do it, which is why I'm Professor Paranormal in my performing as well. How it's helped me over the years is the breadth of magic that I've paid attention to and mentalism, and especially what I've learned from folks in the Psychic Entertainers Association, has helped me enormously in doing investigations. I encourage people who are going to be investigators to read up on the principles of magic and mentalism, even if you're never going to perform, but just don't assume that you know everything, because every magician and mentalist can be fooled by somebody else. It's absolutely proven. I can tell you that. So, but we can learn a lot about how people come to conclusions about their psychic experiences, about paranormal events around them that are happening in their home, by understanding principles of magic and mentalism, and kind of misdirection, things that happen. So it's been incredibly helpful for me, and honestly, it's been incredibly helpful when I've talked to skeptics, because I won't say shout them down, but I can kind of, when they start talking about, well, I'm a magician, it's like, what do you know? I know a lot of people call themselves magicians who perform a little bit, and maybe they're great card guys, but they couldn't tell you the first thing about mentalism or just about anything to do with psychic related magic, because they don't go there. So different principles altogether. Mentalists can easily fool magicians because we have different principles for that. Okay, that was kind of a long diatribe there. Let's see here, Paul. You did an interview with Darren Mack. Yeah, please do let us know when he posts that. Darren's a great guy. I had a great time talking to him. Seeking Eye podcast is a great one. There's I keep doing more podcasts. I think I got 4 lined up in the next 3 weeks. I'm going to post them on my website. I have a lot of them posted already, including some older ones. Darren's interview is actually there on my website as well. So I'm trying to keep up with that as they post them. And I think I'm recording. There's a show called Supernatural Circumstances that Morgan Knudsen and a friend of hers do, and I've been interviewed by them a few times. And her partner on the show who hosts the show is going to be out for a while. So the two of us are going to interview Craig Weiler, who is a journalist, author. He wrote a great book called Psy Wars about the problems with Wikipedia and the skeptics in relation to parapsychology. And he is a main writer and editor for the Paranormal Daily News website. It's just paranormaldailynews.com. And he's got a great article that I've already read that'll be going up really soon, looking at the telepathy tapes and the research with autistic children and how stuff is misrepresented on that show and why it's misrepresented also as well. So we'll be interviewing Craig about his article and about that topic. We're going to be doing the interview, recording the interview on Saturday. I don't know when it's going to be released, but I'll make sure that one gets on the website as well. Got a few others coming up as well. Let's see here. Paul, you really like mentalism, Amazing Kruskin, and Penn and Teller. Penn and Teller are great magicians. When they do mentalism, they do a great job. I mean, they're great performers, no question about it. But they actually don't like mentalism, because if anyone in the audience, if it's presented without heavy disclaimers, they don't like mentalists at all. I mean, they've had mentalists on their show, um, but they often they make sure it's in the context of magic. So it's a real kind of point of conflict between magicians and mentalists that some mentalists do give disclaimers, others do not, and some magicians get very mad because people walk away thinking that things are psychic, even if it's pretty clear it's an entertainment thing. And I've run into that myself. I usually start out my shows these days. I don't give a disclaimer per se, but I say, I'm Professor Paranormal. That is my title and my disclaimer. And that's all I say. And I might say every once in a while throughout the show, this is what it would look like. That's about as close as I get to saying this is a fake. There was a famous mentalist by the name of David Hoy, who would often kind of come out on stage, and the first thing he'd say is, everything you're about to see is a fake. And then that's all he would say. And it was all mentalism. So, it's kind of cool. The amazing Dunninger would make a disclaimer, that a very famous statement about things. And what's really interesting is that when I've performed, I used to perform fairly regularly at the Moss Beach Distillery restaurant, do shows with kind of combined with a real psychic doing something too. I would often have people walk up to me and ask me if I did private readings. And I wasn't really doing any of that in the show. And my response was, just so you know, one of the routines I have in my show is with a mind-reading mutant raccoon puppet, of course. And it's just a pure comedy routine. And when when they asked me very seriously about that, I said, let me recommend another psychic or someone for you. I don't do readings. Rocky does, the raccoon, but he's got a 3-month waiting list. They kind of get it at that point. Lucas, can you think of any notable examples of parapsychologists being duped in studying psychics? One of the things that's really important to know about research, if we're doing research with individuals, is first of all, so let's say somebody presents themselves to us as a psychic, and they want to be tested or they want to be part of an experiment. Whoa. Okay. Looks like I'm back. Yeah, I think we're back. All right. Hopefully, can you folks hear me? Okay. I think there's a delay here. Interesting that it's showing me just kind of working on this right now. I'll go back to Lucas's question in a moment. Okay, sound is fine. That's good. All right. So I think I was talking about the psychics thing and testing psychics. First thing, like I said, we do is we let them show us what they can do, and then put controls. Start working out controlling the environment and what they're actually talking about. So it really takes a little while to do a genuine experiment with someone. I would say that, there's some phony psychics out there and some other folks who, I don't know that they fool us because we're still suspicious, but there's been controversy. I will say that there are those people in the mediumship world. We have this historically, people like Eusapia Palladino in the early 20th century, who would fake things during her seances, but she was caught most of the time, and her comments usually were, it's easier to fake things, takes a lot out of me. And then under better controlled conditions, she was able to do things as well. And the same thing's been for other people. That kind of it complicates things. Uri Geller complicates things for us, because Uri absolutely knows magic and absolutely was an entertainer, and never really used the term psychic to describe himself. Other people did. And I know for a fact that Uri has been able to do things, including bending stuff, that could not be done with a magician's trick. But not every time. And if you're going to be working as a performer on stage, as an entertainer, which Uri likes to do, you got to have backup. You can't go out there and say, I'm not psychic today. So, but there are controversies around questions about certain individuals in the past. Um, Depending on who you talk to, you'll say, well, those parapsychologists were fooled, bamboozled, and all that. I know of a couple parapsychologists that were fooled by psychics, phony psychics, but they were individuals who clearly just thought more of their knowledge of magic or something else than anything else. So the rest of us didn't have that same kind of situation. All right, let's see here. So let me go back back a little bit. Paul, let's see. Okay. Comments about Paul. Penn and Teller are atheists. I watched their show. Yeah, I mean, honestly, unless you are a militant atheist, I think that's the term that Richard Dawkins has used. I see stuff on Quora all the time. People claiming that atheists are bothering them or trying to convince them. It's like, it doesn't happen. It's ridiculous. And it doesn't matter if they don't believe in God. I actually have arguments sometimes with atheists, as do some of the other folks in our field, who more or less, I can't say that I'm an atheist per se, but I'm pretty close. I don't believe in a guy up there. I believe in the Force. I guess you could say I'm a Jedi. So if that makes me an atheist, then that's what it is. I don't really have a belief. I don't have a belief. Atheists don't believe. That's the whole thing. So I've talked to people who are atheists who are like, this stuff is all BS. It's all God related. Just over and over again. It's like, dude, just because you don't believe in God doesn't mean you can't believe in human consciousness. And what does one have to do with the other? I mean, I had an argument with someone who was raising the issue of saying, well, you don't believe in God, so therefore you don't believe in ghosts. It's like, one does not necessarily follow from the other. That's not a logical assumption. Plenty of people who believe in God do not believe in ghosts. So it's not that kind of circumstance at all. All right. Paul, let's see here. Ed Kelly is, Beyond Physicalism, Consciousness Unbound, The Irreducible Mind. Those are all amazing books on consciousness. Absolutely, if you want to get into philosophy, you want to get into history, you want to get into looking at post-materialist, so non-materialist considerations for consciousness, those are actually great books. And interesting is that Ed Kelly, his background is in engineering way back when. So he's been in the field of parapsychology, though, since I've known him, since the early 80s, even before that. And I think he worked with Rhine quite a bit also. Let's see here. Susanna, she didn't fool you, but Sylvia Brown snowed a lot of people. Yeah, not parapsychologists. Not a single parapsychologist who had contact with Sylvia Brown had anything good to say about her. In fact, here's an interesting thing. There was a man named Alan Vaughan who wrote some great books on parapsychology. Alan was both a parapsychologist doing research in the lab and also psychic. He came into the field as a psychic, in fact. And I was having a conversation with Alan back in the early 80s, and we were talking about Sylvia Brown, who was still mainly focused in the Bay Area. And he said that he knew her back when they were in their 20s. And he said she really was gifted, or she was talented. I don't think he used the word gifted. I think he said talented. But then he saw over the years, it was pretty clear that the way he described it, she went to the dark side. She was more interested in money and fame than she was in her own abilities or helping people. And that was pretty clear if you have seen any of Sylvia Brown's TV appearances. She was mean to people. Lack of compassion, just really, I know everything, you don't know anything. So and this was something I had encounters or situations with television and media, pretty interesting in a situation, or just with people who said that they were going to have Sylvia Brown come out to their house, or in a couple of media cases, they were bringing her out to the house after I was there, and I would talk to the clients and say, here's what Sylvia is going to tell you. And I was able to come close to predicting almost every single time. There was maybe 4 or 5 times what Sylvia would tell the people about their circumstance, because she had a stock pattern of doing things. And to that end, she found out, number one, that I was doing that, and number two, that I was letting media people know when they asked about her, this is in the 90s, about her being on having been arrested and on probation for 3 years for a gold mine scam that she and her husband pulled. So I knew a woman, one of my students at JFK, her boyfriend was a cameraman for the TV show Sightings, and he knew me a little bit, and he knew that Sylvia didn't like me, so he wanted to see what would happen if he mentioned my name to her. And he said, and what I found out is he should have actually had the camera rolling, because the response that Tina told me was that he said that he heard words out of this woman's mouth that he never thought he'd hear from a woman of any distinction. A lot of language, let's put it that way. So it's one of the areas, she was one of the people that James, the amazing Randy, and I totally agreed on. Ed and Lorraine Warren also I have problems with for a lot of reasons. Just a lot of reasons. That's a whole different story we can go into another time, or somebody can ask me. All right, W3F, What Happened? That's my friend Liz Enton, who does that show. Mark Anthony talking about his, oh, interesting, I'll have to listen to that. I know Gary Schwartz, who did research, kind of kickstarted, his work kickstarted the mediumship trends. He did work with studying John Edward and a number of other folks back in the early 2000s. And he told a story about having been confronted by Penn backstage of a talk show that was a pilot for another show, and feeling, Penn is a big guy and Gary's not. He said he felt threatened, and I don't know if that's what Penn said or just the way Penn loomed over him, but it was not a good experience for him. We've heard that before. And Penn is very, very much kind of a rabid anti-parapsychology person, anti-psi. Suzanne, it's really interesting that people tend to think that if you don't believe in a god or gods, that you must not believe in the paranormal. And the two, well, then I don't believe in gravity in that way. I mean, we don't see these things in parapsychology. We look at psychic experiences as part of the human being. Nothing to do with God, gods, or anything magical at all, for that matter. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, agnosticism is fine. I mean, asking questions is always good. Amazing Randy reminds you of Sylvia Brown. $1 Million Challenge was a joke. It was a good PR move. It was, he had a $10,000 challenge for many years, and they finally got enough popularity with the skeptics that some people put some money up in escrow for his $1 Million Challenge. And you can still read about it on his old website. I think the stuff is still the jref.edu, I think, or James Randi Educational Foundation. If you just Google that, you'll see something about that. The problem with his $1 Million Challenge was it was a joke on many levels, because everything was in his favor. Even if somebody actually won the money, this is something that I had lawyers looking at the rules. I had lawyers looking at the actual applications. And in fact, what my father's entertainment attorney, who represented some sports figures, I gave him the rules of this and said, look, if this was athletic performance, what would you tell your client? He said, I tell my client not to do it. It's not worth it. And the reason it wasn't worth it is because if you won the money, number one, Randy could have said anything about you and you were waiving all rights to sue. So he could have easily promoted the idea that you conned him and conned everybody. All right, so defamation. Number two, he owned the results, and you couldn't do anything with the results other than say you won the $1 million without permission. There were a whole bunch of different little things that were all in his favor. If you lost, he could say whatever he wanted about you. And then had to be an agreement about what the test was going to be. But we heard from folks, one of my colleagues actually was involved in one of those tests, and it was rather unfair. I mean, the test itself, the controls, over time, they had this young girl, I can't recall exactly, it was a psychokinesis thing, but had her do her thing to demonstrate it over and over multiple times so they could tighten up the controls, and then everybody agreed that the controls are tight. So then they said, as soon as the controls are tight, she'd already been at this for a few hours. She's tired. Then they said, okay, this is the test right now. And Julian Isaacs argued, that's not really fair. You got to give her some time to relax and kind of pull herself back. She said that. I guess her parents said that. They said, no, it's either now or never. And that's really, from a human performance perspective, it doesn't matter what you're doing. That's a simple way to make sure somebody loses. It's to tire them out. So that's the bit of unfairness that often was part of this as well, at least in a couple of instances I know of. Let's see. Mark Anthony was all on an episode of Surviving Death. Yeah. I don't recall which one. He would have been in episode 3 or 4, I believe, for that. Calls himself the psychic attorney because he's a lawyer also. I think you're right. Penn did chill out a little bit after, especially, he got married and had kids. Interestingly enough, having a family apparently chills people out who are, that way, or I'm not just talking about being a skeptic. I dealt with David Letterman when I was doing a segment with him back in the early 90s. And frankly, he was not nice to his crew. He was not nice to his writers. It was just not the best situation. But after he got married and had kids, he's kind of lightened up a lot. Bill Gates changed also. He wasn't that much of an ass beforehand, but it's really kind of interesting how certain things will kind of mellow people out for that. All right. But I don't know about the vegan thing. I don't know if that did it or not. Let's see. Rab6969, trying to find a way to ask without sounding silly. Do you believe apparitions appear if no one is present to see them? Well, okay, so appear is a really interesting question. Whether they're present, I'd say yes. Whether they appear, since we know apparitions are not optical phenomena, in other words, they're not a visual thing. So if I am a ghost, if I'm an apparition, I can be present in a location and do whatever I normally do, but if there's no one there to connect with, to kind of give them the impression of what I look like, there's no one there to see them. There's nothing visible, and there's nothing visible even when you see an apparition. It's not your eyes that are seeing the apparition. It is your perceptual process. It is extrasensory perception. In other words, it's non-sensory for that way. We know that apparitions do not give off light or reflect light. Otherwise, there'd be a lot more pictures, a lot of really good pictures of ghosts. And interestingly enough, there's no reason, if you're there in a room with a psychic or other people, that the apparition appears to two people, the psychic and one other person, but not to everybody else. Your eyes, if you are not seeing the apparition the psychic and the other person are saying are there, your eyes should also see that. It has nothing to do with the way our eyes work. It has everything to do with our perceptual process and our extrasensory perceptual process for that. So they can still be present, even if they're never seen by anybody, for that matter, because they're not always visual. There's other ways people perceive apparitions. If an apparition falls in the woods, that's a good thing. And of course, now here's the other thing. How would we ever know unless a ghost told us, yes, I appeared and saw myself in a mirror? So how would we know? Ed and Lorraine Warren. Okay. So the first real knowledge of Ed and Lorraine Warren that I had was going back to, in terms of issues, went back to my work at the American Society for Psychical Research. I was working there from the beginning of '82 till I think beginning of August, or maybe, yeah, it was beginning of August in 1983. I was in the education department, and we took a lot of calls. We would get the calls that would come into the ASPR about research. We get calls around people who needed an investigation, which would then be passed along to the research director and his assistant, so Carlos Osis and Donna McCormick. And I went out on investigations sometimes if they were in Westchester County where I lived. And I was fortunate. The psychic we had working there, Alex Tanis, who was doing work on out-of-body experiences, also would do investigations. So, and I spent a lot of time talking to Alex. And we ended up talking about the Amityville Horror because it was still being promoted by the Warrens and other people. And I found out that that Tanis and Carlos Osis had investigated the house not too long after the family left. And the family vacated pretty quickly. In fact, there were no investigations when the family lived there, which itself is really important to know. So Ed and Lorraine were, of course, promoting the idea that there was a demon there. That was already in the news. I found out from Osis and Tanis that they were there alone in the house for a while. The only unusual thing, or two things that happened. Number one, Alex picked up on the imprint of the DeFeo murders, and Alex worked quite a bit with police departments and other law enforcement agencies. So, and I can tell you, having seen days when NYPD, Boston PD, Philadelphia PE, the FBI came to consult with Alex, they wouldn't have done that if he wasn't useful to them. And they found, so Alex has those experiences, and then for some reason he went over to a drawer in a bureau in the dining room, and there was a book contract sitting there already. At least that's what Osis confirmed. So they were already in process of selling their story. And at that point, they both decided it's time to leave. And they start going towards the front door, and the door opens up, and there's cameras, media people coming in, and Ed and Lorraine Warren come rushing in and doing their ooh stuff. So Alex and Dr. Osis scooted out. Okay. A couple months later, I get a call from a woman who told me she was and I checked her out, she was a psychotherapist in Connecticut. And she said, I just want to let you know that if you get any people whose houses have been investigated by the Warrens, and they need counseling, I'm getting a lot of clients right now from those people, clientele from those people, because the Warrens are traumatizing them. And then she told me about a couple of situations where she went into the homes because the phenomena was still happening. The Warrens didn't stop the phenomena. They just told them it was demonic. And she found normal explanations. And later on, not too long after, I had a case in Connecticut that the Warrens had already said was genuine phenomena where there was a normal explanation. Unusual, but normal explanation. I found it for them. I showed them what it was, all that. Okay. A little bit later, with all the comments that the Warrens would make on TV that they never charge a fee, when we had the JFK parapsychology program, one woman calls me from, I think it was Michigan, was wondering whether she should have the Warrens come out because she's got this phenomena going on. It sounded like poltergeist phenomena, so it was related to her unconscious, or someone in the household at least. And it wasn't that scary. And I said, well, for one thing, they're gonna scare you. So just let you know that if you're prepared for that, you're okay. I can't tell you not. I said, and then she said, so do you think it's worth paying their expenses to come out? I said, wait a minute, expenses? And she said, yeah, they want $5,000 for expenses for flights and car, ground travel and hotels. I'm sorry. This is like the early 80s. Unless they were like going to buy the plane ticket the day they were going to fly and hire a limo and stay in a 5-star hotel, it wasn't going to be $5,000. So she told them no. We did help her out a bit. Then there was a family down in Orange County, California. it was a crazy case. I'm not even going to go into the details right now, but there was a writer I knew who contacted me. He was actually living in the house to observe the phenomena because it had gotten some local press, and he was going to possibly write it up. He ended up not writing it up because he found that one family member was faking out the others. In the meantime, the Warrens came in, of course, demon thing, whole bit, did the whole thing, and then they present a bill for their expenses of $5,000. And the family was a little bit floored. The writer said, called me up and said, what do I do? And I said, hey, pretty simple. The people who lived in that house were self-employed. I said, okay, tell the Warrens they want an accounting, basically an invoice, breaking down the expenses for their accountant. That's all they have to do. See what the expenses actually are. When they asked, apparently the Warrens got really indignant and left without getting any money, which is good. So there was that problem. There was a situation where, and it was all over the press, that they had a case in Pennsylvania. It actually ended up with a movie based on it. And the Warrens had determined it was demonic. It really sounded like a poltergeist case, not something demonic. But he calls a press conference about having any, and the point of the press conference was they had a video of the demon. Okay, that's they're calling the press together, all that. So a friend of mine, actually a guy I knew from NBC Radio, went to the press conference. I knew other people who were actually some reporters later on, but it's still when I was at the ASPR. This is back when I was at the ASPR. And apparently one of the reporters during the press conference asked, can we see the video? He's talking about the case and the demon and all that. Can we see the video? And there's like silence for a moment. And he says, no, I sent the tape to the Vatican for analysis. And some other reporter says, you didn't keep a copy? And apparently reporters all started leaving. So my friend told me about this. And then we get calls at the ASPR asking what we think about that. So that's just scratching the surface. Let's put it that way. Anyway, quite a bit there. Let's see. Norm Basile. I didn't know Norm, but I knew people who knew him. I will tell you that here's what I think about the Amityville case. There was horrible murderers there. We know that there's this thing called residual hauntings. That's the term that ghost hunters like to use. Imprints of tragic events, or also positive events that living people pick up. But it's a recording. It's not an actual conscious thing. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with affecting people except from a psychological perspective. I would not doubt that the set of murders that happened, I would not doubt that there was some haunting, residual haunting, imprint there. I mean, I've been to places that had awful things happen, and I feel stuff as well. So I would not doubt that. But all the other stuff that Jay Anson wrote about, the stuff that was reported, and by the way, if you went through the book, and a couple of guys back in the early, I was in the 70s, I think it was late 70s, shortly after the book came out, wrote an article called The Calamityville Horror. They were both had a background in journalism. They were radio guys. They went through the book and found so many things that could not be true, possibly true because of timing. The people who the book Anson claimed had verified things did not. They tried talking to them. They didn't verify it. A lot of really false information. It's all written up in my book, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, all of that stuff. But again, I would not doubt that the family had experiences moving into that house, picking up on the murders that had occurred there. I mean, that might not have happened, but I mean, that happens to other people. In other cases, we don't see going to books. Also, by the way, Jay Anson never went to the house. So, let's see. Paul, one of the first books you read on ghost hunting was by Hans Holzer. I read a lot of Hans Holzer's books also in the 60s. I still have a bunch of the paperbacks, and I've bought this big book called Ghosts and another one on psychic experiences, kind of pulling stuff together from things. I mean, Holzer was journalist by training. he got into the field. He actually, I have to say that as much as he popularized stuff and didn't always kind of provide real detail or accurate details, I was fortunate that I got to meet him when I was in high school. I think I was a senior in high school. My uncle Herb Norman was a radio newscaster at WMCA Radio in New York City. And in the building was the New York Institute of Technology, where Holzer was teaching a parapsychology course. So the WMCA Radio had Holzer on radio a few times. And my uncle ran into him, started talking to him about me, and I was invited to come visit Holzer in his home in Riverdale area of New York City. I don't know how long I spent there, but it was in his library. And I've got to say that he had an amazing library. He had the Journal of Parapsychology, the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research. He had all the journals. He had books on legit books on parapsychology, scientific stuff. So he knew stuff. Towards the end of his life, he was kind of going off on other tangents, and I think because of illness and things like that. There's a Parapsychology Foundation 2-part video you can find on the Parapsychology Foundation's YouTube channel called The Reality of Ghostbusting. And Holzer was one of the speakers. I was a speaker. Tony Cornell, phenomenal and key researcher and investigator for the Society for Psychical Research, and also Carlos Alvarado. I really highly suggest you watch that. The stuff that Holzer was saying, honestly, had Tony Cornell, who was sitting next to me, squeezing my arm to keep from laughing. He was pretty diplomatic, but he just couldn't handle it. So it was not. But there's good stuff, I think, in Holzer's older books, no question. And he was a good storyteller, honestly. All right, let's see. Your friend went to Auschwitz, said she could feel residual feelings. Yeah, places like that, amazing. Randy, Pete Jordan, one of the first to tear the Amityville case apart, and he was one of the folks involved in that Calamityville horror piece as well. I talked to Pete back in the early 90s, actually in the 80s, more than a bit, about the Amityville case, and he really tore that apart heavily. So I contributed to Fate as a columnist from April 1991 till the end of 2004. Initially doing a monthly column. I had taken over from Martin Eben, who was retiring, and he had taken over that column from Scott Rogo, who had passed away in 1990. It was a good experience writing for them. I'm just sorry that it's kind of fallen out of favor over the years. And it's still being published once in a while, but it's hard to find anywhere unless you subscribe to it. I saw the video with you at the Parapsychology Foundation. You liked it. I'm glad to see that. Yeah. It was really interesting. One of the things that happened during that session was that Holzer made some definitive statements, like this is the absolute truth. One of which was that ghosts don't know that they're dead. That's based on having worked with 5 different mediums. And then I got up and spoke about this one case, the first cases I had that was, to my mind, absolutely positively a real apparition case. Hadn't had anything that good. And that ghost knew she was dead. Absolutely knew she was dead. And I had other cases like that. So he wasn't happy with me. Let's put it that way afterwards. And one thing I should mention, he was in a wheelchair. He was, again, not in the best of health at the time. And from what I found out, that afterwards, he told, when people were asking him just how old he was, anywhere from 82, I think it was, to 89 years old. The average was 84, 87. So I don't know if he was just playing with people or whatever. He also, if you watch that, there's some amusing stuff in there where he talks about the afterlife having multiple levels, which many people around the world talk about. But he talked about actually having to fill out paperwork, like there's a bureaucracy. And that's when Tony Cornell was really squeezing my arm hard. Can there be a residual haunting caused by people who are still living? Actually, all residual hauntings are caused by living people. There's no recording of the dead people. There's only a recording of the living people. When they die, that recording stops. All right, we have many cases on record. One of my earliest cases was definitely people were still alive. They left an impression behind, which was an auditory experience that the couple had. Absolutely positively, they were alive, and there have been a number of others as well. But one of the cases I did for sightings early on was pretty interesting as a use case for explaining this. This couple in the Portland area, it's one of the earliest sightings episodes. This couple, the Browns, I think it was, in Portland. It was a couple that had bought a house near the airport. The husband worked in airport security. He wasn't on camera because of that. But they had called sightings. We were actually looking for cases, and they had called sightings. Two things were happening. One was definitely residual haunting piece, and the other was seemingly interactive stuff going on, not related to each other. In fact, the interactive stuff was people from owners from way back. The residual thing had been pretty recent. They bought the house at a real bargain because a murder had happened at the house at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And they knew this. They bought the house, got a great deal. They didn't think anything about anything paranormal. And then they, had an experience of visually seeing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon this guy stabbing this woman. And one of the relatives, they didn't say anything to relatives. Relatives came, and one of them was taking a nap and was woken up by a scream. And he looks over in this area in the living room. This guy is stabbing this woman. Right? As soon as she is clearly expired, the replay stops. How do we know it's a replay? Why it's not a ghost? Well, for one thing, the killer was in prison, alive. We see that it's living people who leave impressions. Like living people make movies which can still be watched well after the actors die. That's about the closest it would be. Okay, let's see. Anything else here? Paul, you'd like to get into parapsychology? Depends on how you want to get into parapsychology. There is the California Institute of Human Science in Southern California now, an accredited organization, accredited college and university, is now offering a specialization in psychology at the master's level and the PhD level. Jeffrey Mishlove, who is kind of a luminary in our field, he runs the New Thinking Aloud YouTube channel, but Jeffrey also has a PhD. All right, I'm going to keep talking because I think that this will catch up at some point. Apparition case you mentioned is the one that involves a spirit named Lois. Yes, that is it. We have heard you discuss the case before, and we're curious if she's still around. I do not know if Lois is still around. Last time I talked to the family was 2004. So I'm not even sure whether the family's moved. I don't even think I have a phone number for the person, my main principal contact. So, yeah. All right. Hopefully the buffering will stop very shortly. Yeah, it looks like it stopped now. So I did keep talking. So hopefully you can hear what I said. Anyway, let's see. So the Lois case, just to kind of close that loop right now, haven't talked to the family since 2004. She was still there at that time. Don't know if she's kind of moved on at this point. All right, Unsolved Mysteries had good segments. It partly depended on who the actual director was, and it seems like I've frozen again. Oh. Looks like I've totally frozen. This might be my computer now. This is weird. Oh, shoot. Okay, so people can see and hear me now, hopefully. I can't see a thing on my computer. Let's see if I can get something back here. Wow. Okay, let's try this again. All right, I'm still there. Okay. Weird because I couldn't even type anything on my computer other than on my a phone link. So hopefully, anyway, I think we're coming up close to the end here. Is that 80 words per minute? Thank you. Anyway, sightings. There's a few sightings episodes that are actually on YouTube. You can kind of search for them. I believe that their initial pilot for some of the ghost stuff. It's sightings ghosts. I believe that is on YouTube. So you can probably find that. And there's occasional early episodes. Some of my segments, most of my segments actually, I have uploaded to my Lloyd Auerbach YouTube channel. So it's just youtube.com/Lloyd Auerbach. So I can take a look, and there's a lot of media stuff there, a lot of past episodes, including the Brown cases should be there as well that I was just talking about. The case of Lois, I've talked about in some podcasts, I've talked about in some other places, about that kind of first case where there was absolutely an interactive ghost. You can read a really deep discussion of that in Leslie Kean's book, Surviving Death. That's where the best write-up of it is currently right now. All right, so it looks like we are, we apologize. Our producer and I apologize for the problems tonight. We have to figure out what's going on. But thank you all for joining. I know we're coming down to the wire here. Yeah, Sightings Reboot would be good. Honestly, I had a great experience working with them. The last year that they were in operation, they were went a little bit off the rails. But for the most part, that show was a really good show. Kept really doing a great job. Love to see a Sightings reboot. Maybe if they're gonna reboot the X-Files, we can get them to reboot Sightings too. I don't know if we can do that. Anyway, I want everybody to have a few good weeks. I want to just mention that we are skipping 3 weeks this time. Normally I do every 2 weeks, every other week, but because of Memorial Day weekend, we are skipping that weekend. So the next night I'll be doing this, hopefully without any technical problems, will be June 1st. So, and then we'll be every 2 weeks after that, at least into September, when I may be going out of town for a vacation. So definitely kind of keep an eye out. Again, June 1st is the next session of Ask Professor Paranormal. Think of some questions, but we'll kind of get everything going again in 3 weeks. Thank you all for joining, and take care.